Yes, that's right. Survivor Know-It-Alls is back after episode 6 of Survivor Kaoh Rong. And here is Stephen Fishback. Oh, wait, cross that out, right? Josh Wigler on your parchment. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm surprised. Aren't we supposed to start at 9:45?
No,
Am I early?
9:15. No, you were right on time.
Okay. All right.
Right on time, Josh Wigler. Filling in for Stephen Fishback,
Yes.
who is on assignment this week. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well. Like Stephen Fishback, but rounder.
Yes. All right, so very exciting week here on the podcast because, as many of you guys know, that of course that Josh is with us every week on the Wiggle Room. This week filling in for Steven, but we have a very exciting announcement here on Wife Swap Week here on Rob as a Podcast. Stephen Fishback will be filling in for Josh Wigler on the Wiggle Room.
What are you going to call the Wiggle Room this week when Stephen Fishback shows up? Because you can't call it the Fish Bowl. That didn't work.
The fish tank. I don't know what we'll call that. Right. But I will check in with Stephen Fishback later on this week in place of the usual podcast we do catching up with Josh. So it'll be a very fun week, and we'll get to spice things up, put the keys in different bowls this week. There you go.
We're doing the swinger party? Is that what's happening here? It's very uncomfortable for me.
Keeping things interesting. Right.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what kind of musical exclusive Steven lines up this week.
Right. If this works out, I'll mention it to Nicole and see what she thinks, and then away you go.
Stop. End it there. It's over. It's done.
Done. All right. Anyway, Josh. What a Survivor episode. Very, very fun Survivor to talk about as we are closing out the pre-merge here tonight. And what a pre-merge it's been on a season with very little hype. Another really strong episode that I'm very excited to break down with you here tonight live.
Absolutely, man. I mean, this is what you always say, Rob. Low expectations, the key to happiness, and I can't think of a season less hyped in recent memory than this season. You know, and in fact, it was like anti-hyped. It was like, well, this season's a little bit of a letdown. I feel like that was the rhetoric we were hearing. This season's been awesome. It's been, every single episode of this pre-merge has had something to talk about. It's been very eventful. It's been very exciting. So yeah, it's been great. I'm loving Kaoh Rong, and this episode was no exception. It was surprising. It was some outside the box strategy going on tonight. So lots to chew on.
A lot of inside the box strategy, a lot of stacking the middle of the box strategy. Right. So we'll talk about
a lot of boxes breaking your head open if you were Joe Del Campo. I think I scored points on that, by the way.
Yeah, maybe. I think you might. All right, so we will talk all that through here and much, much more as we get ready on another busy week here on the podcast with this Survivor episode. Of course, Thursday is exit interview day, and both Josh Wigler and myself will be speaking with the recently departed Dr. Peter, and we will have a lot to say both here on Robin's podcast and I'm sure with Josh on Parade.com.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to Peter. Peter had an eventful run on the show, short-lived. I'm curious to know how he felt about the way he was portrayed on the show, because it was certainly interesting. So I'm looking forward to talking to Peter and kind of picking his brain about the whole situation there.
Okay, I have a feeling he will have a lot to say. Yes. And then we've got some really great podcasts coming up as well here on RHAP because later on tonight I'll be recording this week's recap podcast with the great winner of Survivor One World and possibly, I believe, Josh Wigler's favorite survivor, Kim Spradlin.
Khaleesi.
Yes. We'll be speaking with her, and then we will have on the voicemail show a really great voicemail guest, the great Jason Somerville. Will be answering your phone calls and talking about everything that happened in the episode.
Kim Spradlin and Jason Somerville, that's like podcasting paradise for me.
Doesn't get a lot better.
That's a really good combo. That's really solid.
We're spoiling you guys. Okay, yeah. All right, so let's get into this, and what an exciting tribal council. One of my favorite metaphors in all of Survivor is when they say that the tribal council has come alive, and that metaphor was used tonight. The vote was alive tonight, where it was Scott and Ty. Forget about Jason and Scott. There's a new bromance in town, and they're really dictating the action here at this tribal council. And Josh, I'm so excited that you're here with me tonight to talk this through because we started such an interesting conversation on the Wiggle Room talking about whether or not the brains should get rid of Peter at this vote.
Right.
And you had said that they should be getting rid of Peter at this vote because that will make them a big target going into the merge if they go in with 5 votes. I had said that they should not be getting rid of Peter because I was under the impression that Peter had really fixed his wagon to to Joe and Aubrey,
Right.
and that he was going to be a loyal soldier moving forward. It turned out to be the case that he was not a loyal soldier moving forward, and he actually made himself really obvious about it and came off very schemy. And really, we saw this battle being fought, this same debate that you and I were having during the week, ends up being had by Aubrey and Joe.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's this whole. It goes back to what Aubrey was saying. The devil you know. She knows Peter. She's played with Peter. She's played with Peter the entire time she's been out there. She knows his tells. She knows how to read him. And it was very clear to Aubrey and Joe that Peter was flirting with the enemy. That he was trying to come up with some sort of contingency plan that may have become Plan A, may have become the original plan to go after Aubrey or Joe. And I feel like Aubrey just felt like no more chances. Can't take a chance with this guy anymore, and I think that Peter really made his bed tonight.
Yeah, I really feel like Peter, to start with him, played this game incredibly poorly. I think that he's somebody who seems like he's a very bright guy, but I really feel like if you're going to go and look at his resume through 6 episodes of Survivor, that he really did, and he was somebody that had a lot of chances, and he really mismanaged his chances almost at every turn in this season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to last week's episode when Peter was talking about the results of the tribe swap and how he's in this great position, and I'm not going to even have a bead of sweat dripping down my forehead until I get to the merge. He was really feeling like he was going to coast his way there, and this would not have happened probably if he hadn't been flirting with the idea of going with Julia and Scott and Ty and teaming them against someone like Joe or Aubrey. If he had just coasted, if he had just played it really cool and had not fielded those discussions at all, you got to imagine that Aubrey is not flipping that vote. It's still a tie, but who knows what the tie situation turns out to be. I feel like
he voted with Scott.
Yeah, well, Ty voted with Scott. It's a TIE tie.
Oh.
So who knows? Who knows how that would have worked out? But Peter is making his move, and he gets caught, and I think that he just lacks that finesse to do that kind of double dealing out there.
Now, if he was going to switch, wouldn't the move have been to switch at the last vote instead of voting against Anna and really seemingly leading the charge with, hey, Aubrey and Joe, we really need to be getting Anna out at this next vote?
Yeah, absolutely, because he was saying that that Anna is a gamer, that Anna, Anna's not only beautiful but intelligent, and she's going to charm people and be manipulative. So he is, he's correctly assessing Anna as a threat, but that is somebody that would be willing to work with him on a vote if it means that Anna's not going to go. Taking out Anna at that point, allowing Julia to come back in, who maybe he sees as somebody he can manipulate better. She's younger, maybe doesn't know the game super well. I get that on paper, but you're allowing more time for someone like Scott and Ty to bond with Aubrey and Joe, and giving them more time to come together as a foursome, and Peter giving himself more time to be distanced from these people. So yeah, if he was going to make this flip, which he had said after Liz had gone home, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to flip this game on its head. He should have done it when he had the immediate chance, I think. I think that would have been the move for Peter. Otherwise, you just coast with the brains and you don't even think about flipping on the brains.
Let's talk this through from Aubrey's perspective, because I think that's where all of the intrigue with this vote ultimately lies, because she is the person who ends up switching her vote, and really, I don't believe we've ever seen that before. Josh, can you think of an example where
Someone on Twitter threw this out, that I think that there were some votes that were crossed out when Brad Culpepper went home.
Well, that's exactly, that's a great point. That's exactly the tribal council I want to reference, because to me, this was almost identical to the scenario back, I believe it's the 4th episode of Survivor Blood versus Water, where the late, great Caleb Bankston is in a similar situation about this, and I believe that Brad Culpepper is trying to put the votes on Sierra, but Caleb is under the impression that the votes could be, or if he's next, if the votes aren't indeed coming for him. And he basically says at the tribal council, hey, just so you guys know, me and Sierra and Katie, we're voting for Brad tonight. You guys do what you want. You should vote for Brad. And Brad Culpepper is really caught flat-footed, and they don't do it. They're not as on the nose about it tonight. There's a little bit more of like, hey, go with this plan, go with this plan. But I wonder, would it have been better to call it out as what they're doing? And hey, if you guys don't want to force a tie, put your votes on Peter tonight.
Well, I think, you could do that, and that certainly would, spare everybody an extra round of voting. But when we get to a tie vote, if that's the way it goes and Aubrey votes down the line, votes with Joe, votes with Pete, and the other three vote against Pete, and that tie situation is coming up, you got to imagine that Aubrey is pulling the Vetus and casting that vote on Peter anyway.
Right, so Aubrey is put into that Vetus situation, and here we have Aubrey where she writes down Julia's name, and then she crosses it off. So do you think, is that better or worse moving forward for her than for Vetus, where he actually did end up forcing the tie, and instead of on the tiebreaker vote switching, she switches her vote after writing it on the parchment? Do you think that, does that endear her, or do you think it's like, hey, you kind of you tried to vote me out first to Julia. I guess you're cool, but if it was
totally.
Right, it's like the guillotine, didn't come down cleanly.
Right, it's an ugly chop. But I think that it's the kind of thing where if she had just done it cleanly, if she had just written down Peter's name, then there's no sort of residual thing for Julia, who's thinking, oh, so you were thinking about me. Maybe it signals to everybody in the game. It could be dangerous for someone like Joe if Aubrey is looking like she waffled on the vote a little bit. I think that especially in a pre-merge where Peter is not going to count towards anything anymore. Just write the name down. That being said, I think that she was very confused probably. It was hard to do that math immediately on the spot, given that Scott was calling out the original plan, stick to the original plan, things like that. So she changes her mind. She's up there for a while. It would have been much nicer if she could have just written Peter's name down, or maybe could she have taken a different piece of parchment? Could she have ripped up the first piece of parchment, or at least done a better job of scribbling it out and be like, oh yeah, I misspelled Peter's name the first time.
Yeah,
I wanted to do it better.
What I would have done is then I think I would have completely crossed out Peter and then flipped it over and on the back written
right.
Or flip, completely, just or really crossed out.
You can do better than a single strike through.
Right.
With Julia's name. I think that you could at least do the double strike through is probably even better.
Jeff, do you have any whiteout? Could I get some? Do you have any liquid paper?
It would probably be beige out, but yeah, if they've got any of that, that would be sweet.
Yeah, that would be really, really good if you could do that, or maybe somehow turn Julia into an animal that you drew, and that's something. That would be Eric Reichenbach could have done it.
Yeah, this is when it comes in handy to have a really visual artistic talent so that you could just really make that work for you. But yeah, I think something better than the single strike through would have been good, because I think it does signal, it's yay, thank you for voting with us, that was great, but there's no incentive for these people really to feel like she's on board with them. I think that it just looks like a survival instinct move rather than something that maybe she would have been able to have a better chance of smoothing over and just being yeah, no, I feel like this makes more sense. I don't think it's a colossal error or anything like that, but definitely funny to think about.
Where do you think the Aubrey and Joe relationship stands moving forward? Do you think that Joe can forgive this sin, or do you think that he feels like that this is something that she can't come back from?
Joe seems like a reasonable enough guy that if Aubrey comes back and explains why she did what she did, especially, it seems fairly cut and dry. She goes back and she tells Joe, these three were voting for Peter. This was going to happen. We were going to go to a tie. We would have had to flip anyway. I just forced it early. You and I are still good. We've got brains on the other side. We're going to be able to figure this out. You were right about Peter. He was a worm. He was a scoundrel. He was coming after us at some point. If she can argue all of that stuff, I feel like Joe, he's gonna handle it pretty well. I think that he likes Aubrey, and there was obviously no love lost between him and Peter. If anything, I think that Joe's gonna be bummed that he didn't get the chance to take the shot at Peter himself.
Mm-hmm. Just to talk through Aubrey's move that we haven't discussed whether or not it was the correct move, do you agree that Aubrey made the right move for Aubrey tonight?
So it's interesting. All of the things that I had said earlier in the week, you and I had talked about it on the other podcast, on the Wiggle Room, about why it makes sense for the brains to target someone like Peter. He's showing himself to be untrustworthy. He's shown himself to be somebody who wants to flip. They've lived with this guy for a while, and they understand how he's playing the game, and he might be somebody that's really dangerous come the merge. Killing him now means that we can go into the merge with 4 brains. We can even the numbers a little bit. We don't look like such a massive target against against the other players in the game, where everyone would just want to come against the Brains. Those are all positive reasons to get rid of Peter, I think. The one thing that really, gives me some pause is they did know Peter pretty well. And I'm thinking, like there's people in the past in Survivor who have tried to take their shot at a power position, somebody who is supposed to be an ally, and it hasn't worked out, and that person now looks very foolish, and that person can be strung along. And someone who I think is a good example, a good dynamic that we could compare this to is like a Sophie and Albert type of thing. And, Albert he comes off as very schemy, and no one in the game can trust him ever again, and he basically limps along to the final tribal council and is a non-factor there. And granted, we're very, very early, but there might be something to be said for kind of, gutting Peter a little bit, putting him in his place the way that Joe did, bringing him along to the merge. And if you're Aubrey, now you really know how Peter plays. You really know his reads. You know how he comes after people, and that really is the devil and he's kind of in this position where if he's going to make flips in the future, you probably have a decent read on it. So I'm a little torn. What's your take ultimately on whether Aubrey made the right move or not?
So ultimately, I feel like she did make the correct move. I think that this is the right move, even more so potentially than Vetus, because in the situation where Vetus was in, you didn't know necessarily if there was going to be a tribe swap coming out of that potentially that might have been. They might have stuck with that tribe for a little bit longer, whereas the merge is almost certainly coming right after this. So for Aubrey, it needs to be all about just getting through that tribal council. I do think that she did it rather unelegantly, and I'm pretty sure that's not a word, because I think that what she could have done it in a way where she ends up voting against Peter, but didn't end up with this sort of Hamlet-type tribal council situation. Sorry to reference Shakespeare without the knowing his know-it-all here.
Sure.
But for her, I think she could have done it in a way where she could have really endeared herself to Ty and to Scott and Julia more so than how she did, where she could have maybe had a working relationship with them moving forward, where she says, okay, you know what, you guys are right, I'm in on this, okay? I'm not going to tell us anything to Joe, and she feels like, okay, maybe I could patch things up with Joe, and now I have a really good relationship with Scott, with Ty, with Julia moving forward and going into the merge, where she's sort of like a reluctant ally of theirs now, and I think that she could have potentially gotten herself with a better working relationship with those people.
And I think that's important. I think that's really important, because you get it in the episode too, when Ty and Scott and Julia, when they're trying to pitch Aubrey on flipping on Peter, and she's, I appreciate what she's doing. She's being, very, quiet about it and just listening a lot and being like, thank you for telling me, and willing to hear them out but not giving them too much in exchange. And who knows what other conversations happened out there, but based on what we saw, Ty and Scott were at the point where like, we got to vote for Julia because this is not going to happen for us, and Aubrey is clearly not playing ball. And I feel like there was just a level of coldness that Aubrey was exuding towards them, and I think that there's got to be a little bit more warmth in her game towards people who are in a position where she would be potentially working with them going forward, because there's probably not a huge emotional attachment between these people, and I think that that would go a long way towards these numbers sticking together in the future, whereas right now it was really just like it could just be like a done-in-one business decision rather than really endearing herself to these people. So I think that that's very important, that it was kind of a cold deal.
But I sympathize with Aubrey, because in her position, she feels like, hold on, is this a trap? Are these guys trying to trick me? Here's Julia, who is on her last legs in the game, that I don't know if I can believe what she's telling me. Here's Ty, who was her ally. Here's Scott. Right. I don't know how much I can trust him. So how much can I really gauge, like, maybe this information isn't true? So it's easy for us to know what's going on, because we got to see Peter in his confessionals. We got to see Peter's conversations with Julia, Peter in his conversations with Scott. So it's very easy from where we sit. For Aubrey, she really did a good job of, keeping up her poker face, as
so to speak,
Anna,
yes.
As Anna did
yes.
an okay job with as well, and Josh did an even better job with.
That was all Wanda. That's all Wanda.
Yeah. So I feel like I do sympathize with the plight of where Aubrey was coming from, but I think that probably whether or not she was going to make that move, I think she needs to arrive at that decision quicker, and then give people a better impression of what's going to happen.
I think it was one of the trickiest decisions we've seen all season. It might be the hardest call that anyone has made on the show so far this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just to go back to what we were talking about on the wiggle room as well, like I really felt like that Peter was going to be a solid number for that group, and I had said that I think it would be a mistake for Aubrey and Joe to get rid of Peter at that time. Again, believing that he was going to be a solid number, the fact that he is not going to be a solid number for them, I say get rid of that wild card because you can't trust him. He'll be in your plans. He's going to be somebody who's going to be a problem down the road. So I completely am on board with getting rid of him. But I said at the time also, I said, if you get rid of Peter, I think it would be a mistake, again, thinking that he was a loyal ally, because you are playing into the hands of the Braun tribe, who stuck in that middle where they came into this tribe swap down 5-5-3. Now they potentially go into the merge 4-4-3. And this is, I think, going to be one of the more intriguing merges, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, in the history of Survivor.
It's an interesting dynamic right now, too, because, it's not the kind of thing where there is a lot of... I don't think that there is a ton of loyalty within these tribes, except I think that there is with the Brains, because now we've cut Peter. We cut Peter, who was really closely knit with Liz. That was the two that they had to get rid of. Neil, Aubrey, Joe, and Debbie, they seemed like a really powerful four. Obviously, the three Braun are really tight, but Beauty is kind of up for grabs. I don't feel like there is an intense loyalty between Nick, Michelle, Ty, and Julia, especially we saw it on the Chan Lo side of things, where Nick and Michelle, at least from Michelle's point of view, is not really a powerful thing. So those people are really up for grabs. I'm curious to see about the bonds that Debbie has forged over at Chan Lo and how that would factor into things. So I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of potential mercenaries in the mix here. I think that things could get really ugly really quick, which would be very fun to see.
Yeah, we'll talk more through on the Chan Lo side of things. Let's just finish out with this tribal council. How about the way that Ty and Scott ultimately played it out at this tribal council? How much of a factor do you think that they were in terms of talking Plan A, original plan, original recipe? Secret plan.
Right.
What do you think about how they ended up playing it, and how much of a factor do you think that was in terms of getting Aubrey to switch her vote?
Well, I liked it a lot. I think that you raised an idea of what they could have done if they could have just been more direct about it, being like, the three of us are voting for Peter. There's certainly effectiveness that happens there, but I think if the idea was to cause enough pandemonium that someone, whether it's Aubrey or Joe, is going to think, oh, so they are not on board with what we were originally saying. We really ought to think about shaking up what we were going to do. It worked. It was very effective. It got Aubrey to flip. That being said, it did feel like there was some level of confusion among the three. I think that Ty and Scott were on the same page, so that's really all that mattered, because Julia was going to vote for Peter anyway. But there was, to me, I did sense just a little bit of like, were the three of them completely on the same page? And I think that might speak to your argument of like, yeah, let's just say out loud that we're going after Peter.
Yeah, I don't think you have anything to lose there in terms of, hey, look, here's what we're doing tonight, Jeff. Okay, Aubrey, you're either with us or against us. Now you give Peter the chance to defend himself when you do that, as opposed to that. But maybe,
sure, with an argument and potentially with an idol. If Peter were to have an idol, they have no idea what the Brains idol situation is.
That's true. And based on how we've seen Peter conduct himself, I have a feeling it would not be a great defense of his position. But how ironic!
I would have liked to have seen him dance on the hook a little bit more, though. He's a great dancer, that Peter.
How ironic was it that Peter's biggest defender in the game tonight was Joe, who basically called him out and said, "Yeah, this guy's definitely lying to me."
Yeah, Joe. Joe. He sticks to his guns. I guess he's a loyal guy. I was surprised by that though, because they did have this big blow up back at camp, and Joe got past it pretty fast. He was pretty okay after a while.
Yeah, I think that Joe maybe felt like, hey, I got this guy back on board. I scared him straight, and he's back with us.
He's got this young punk by the gonads.
And ironically, he did get him back on the straight and narrow and back on the Brains bandwagon, to the point where Peter is voting for Julia, that Peter isn't flipping sides and trying to vote for Joe after that confrontation. So, you could question Joe's methods and the social game, where Aubrey said, hey, you shouldn't have done that. You probably shouldn't have done that. But it did get Peter back on board, to the point where he was with them on a 3-3 tie and wasn't trying to throw Joe under the bus with that group of Julia and Scott and Ty.
Now, for Scott, Ty, and Julia, who end up voting for Peter, and they pull Aubrey in by, announcing basically, essentially announcing that they're going to go for a tie vote against Peter, and it swings Aubrey over. Did they target the right person? Peter was somebody that had shown that he was willing to work with them. He wanted to work with them. He backed down because he got called out, and it was too suspicious for him to make any moves. But he is a guy who expressed a willingness to work with these people. He is not as tight. He has made it clear that he is not as tight with the Greater Brains tribe. He is somebody that in a situation where you take out a Joe, you take out an Aubrey, now you have 4 brains left in the game, and one of those 4 is not really into the brains thing. Don't you free up that guy to be more loyal to you? Should they have targeted Aubrey or Joe?
That's a great point. I wonder, and that'll be a great question that we can ask him tomorrow in terms of, at what point did Peter decide, hey, I'm not going to go along with this plan? Was it his decision, or was it Ty and Scott and Julia for some reason that said, hey, we really like Joe, we really like Aubrey, we want to keep them around in the game?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, Ty has said, he said in last week's episode, I don't like Peter. He made that
he didn't
clear.
like him.
Not a fan of Peter, not a Peter fan. And if Ty doesn't like you, that says something. So, I think a lot of it comes down to just like, who do you want to play with? But I think in terms of who is somebody who is desperate, who is somebody that might be loyal to you, or at least not as loyal to their original tribe after a move like this, I feel like this frees Peter up in a way where you can predict him a little more, you can use him probably a little bit more. I feel better about Peter not going back to Neil and Debbie and Joe or Aubrey, which one of those is gone. So I think from Scott, Ty, and Julia's perspective, I'd really like to know why they ultimately went after Peter, because I feel like it may not have been the choice that I would have wanted to make. I think that you might want to go after a more solid player at this point.
If I had to guess, approximately 30 minutes from now, somewhere in parts unknown, Stephen Fishback will tweet out a link to his People blog for this week, and he will award a Fishy Award for this week's episode. Where do you think it goes? Do you think it goes to Aubrey for switching her vote? Do you think it goes to either one of or some combination of Ty, Scott, or Julia, who I think coming in from Braun Beach, a.k.a. Exile Island, I think did a tremendous job in terms of how she played this hand?
Yeah, I want to talk through Julia for sure. I don't think that she's going to get the Fishy. My guess, based on Steven isn't podcasting, but he's tweeting tonight, and based on what I saw from Steven's tweets, I think that he's really into Aubrey's move. I think that he likes that Aubrey, cut down somebody who, once you know that person has your name, your head in their sights, that you need to take care of that person. And I think that he's going to like that Aubrey headhunted Peter before Peter was able to make any more moves. So my guess is that he's going to give the Fishy to Aubrey. But I agree. I think that Julia played solid. We were talking. Everybody was talking. I think the popular opinion was Julia comes back into the game in a really unenviable position, and she is going to be, very easily picked off. She's just somebody that you could really just remove from the game without breaking a sweat. And she does not go home. So how much do you think that that's from her effort? How much do you think that's Peter shooting himself in the foot? What's your read on Julia coming back into the game tonight?
She hit the ground running. She did a really good job. She wasn't freaked out at all about the situation that she came back to. She started working with Ty, and she was very approachable to Peter, who really started to tell, okay, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's what I want to do. And she's like, yeah. And when prompted, she was able to regurgitate that information, especially at Tribal Council. And I think she played a big role in damning Peter at that Tribal Council by talking about what he was up to. And I think that, you heard Scott talk about how there's people that are constantly talking in this tribe, and, somebody who is untrustworthy. And I wonder just how much that this group was playing this out as going forward, this is our group. Like, I don't know if necessarily this tribe was playing this like the merge was coming. I think that they would seemingly, to me, played this as if this tribe was going to stay together for another vote.
Right, and I mean, if that's the case, then does that cast any doubt on Aubrey's move? If Aubrey is making this move thinking that we are going to stick together for another round at least, now she has absolutely handed away the majority, and her or Joe should certainly, by conventional wisdom, be on the block for the next vote.
Well, I'm not sure if she did. Just if Scott thinks that maybe, or if Ty thinks that maybe this tribe is sticking together for another round, doesn't mean necessarily that Aubrey is thinking that same thing, because I think it's reasonable to assume the Survivor Survivor merge is coming at 11. And I think that, again, you know what happens to people that assume, but
Sure.
I think that seems like a really logical thing to have happened, especially when you come into the Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty season and you're down to these numbers.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's go to the other side of the aisle where we started talking about some of the intrigue surrounding the merge. And we got to see a lot of what was going on with the other side of the Beauty Tribe, with Nick and Michelle, and things are not as rosy. We saw a lot of last week. We saw the Debbie and Neil side talking with Jason and Sydney. And then we saw a little bit of Nick talking with Jason last week, but this week we got to see some dissension in the ranks between these two, and I wonder what that Beauty Tribe is going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. First off, I don't think that did we get a single confessional from Kyle Jason tonight?
No, really. You saw Debbie, Nick, and Michelle on that Chan Lowe side. I don't think you saw anything from Jason, Sydney, or Neil in terms of confessional.
Jason hiatus this week. But how quickly Purple Nick goes from Purple Nick to Adonis Nick. He is revered as a god by Debbie, and he is acting with sort of this godlike gravitas and saying, I want Michelle to act the way that I think she should act. I want her to say the things that I think she should say. It turns out Michelle is at least atheist to the religion of Nick. She is not buying that gospel. She is not into it. She is, she's in a tough spot too. I mean, it's a very good thing that merge is coming up, because I think that if that tribe does go to tribal, she's in a big bad situation there. But she is not buying what Nick is selling, and we had been led to believe, I mean, she hadn't really commented on it at all in the episode last week, but Nick was talking about herself and Michelle as a pair. I don't know how much Michelle thinks of herself and Nick as a pair, and I do think that Beauty Tribe is easily the most fractured tribe in the game right now.
Yeah, but I think that fracture is really just between Nick and Michelle, because I think that Michelle could easily slide back into what Ty and Julia are doing. But to me, I think that what makes this really interesting, I think in this group, I think that of this former Beauty Tribe, and it was interesting, it was the Beauty Tribe that really fractured post-swap in the original Brains versus Beauty versus Brawn. It seems to me like Nick wants to work with Brawn, while Michelle wants to work with Brains. And it seems like that's where the main conflict is coming from.
Everybody's team Nicole Stradamus on this one. Everyone loves Debbie. Everyone wants to work with Debbie. They acknowledge that she's quirky. They acknowledge that she's weird, but they also think that she's honest and that she's smart and a good leader. And Michelle wants to work with Debbie, and who knows how much is it Debbie blowing smoke, as Nick suggests? Is this just Debbie, making Michelle feel comfortable before she brings her to the slaughterhouse? Is that what Debbie is doing, or is Debbie keeping her options open and looking at Michelle as a possible partner down the line? Hard to say, but Michelle likes Debbie, and I think that's a testament to the way that Debbie is playing. But it's an interesting divide between Nick and Michelle, who want to go different ways, and Nick really does not even want to entertain the notion of going with Brains, which is weird to me because it seems like he would want to work with someone like Debbie if he thinks that Debbie is infatuated with him. Like, if that's his read on Debbie, that Debbie is head over heels in love with Nick, maybe he would want to work with her and see what he could do there.
I don't know. We don't know what that relationship is like between Nick and Jason, but I really do think that the key point in all of this is that line that Debbie said to Michelle of, you know what, Jason is the one, he's lazy. I'd like to get him out. He would be my target if we went to a tribal council. And
I don't really like his anus armpit. I'm not a fan of that.
Right. I really would like to see a woman win this game. Do you think, is Debbie blowing smoke to Michelle at that point, or do you think that Debbie is being authentic with Michelle? Because to me, that changes everything based on the answer to that one question.
I think that it's like what we talked about earlier this week with Kyle Jason. And Jason and Sydney are both fielding offers. Sydney is talking with Debbie. Jason is talking with Debbie, and then Jason is talking with Nick, and it seems like Braun is in that pivot position on that tribe where they could go either way. They are the two people that are desired. They are the ones that both sides want to work with, and I think that for Jason in that moment, he is saying yes to Debbie and he means it, and he's saying yes to Nick and he means it, and he's keeping his options open because they haven't gone to tribal yet. Then he gets to make his decision, but you want to be in the position to make that decision. I think Debbie, who is proving herself to be a very astute and even a scoot player of the game, I think that she is somebody who looks at the situation and says, like, yeah, it would be great to work with these Braun. What if that doesn't work out? What if they are conning me? What if they're playing with me? I should be in a position where I could potentially work with Nick and Michelle. So I think that there is an aspect of it that could be stroking the hair and, getting Michelle nice and comfortable before she snaps her neck. Or it could be, I like Michelle. I think that maybe in the future I will work with Michelle. I don't think it's inauthentic. I don't think it's ironclad, but I don't think it's inauthentic when Debbie is saying, Michelle, you're a good kid, and I want to see a woman win this game, and I think that we could do stuff together.
Because I think it's a really bad move if Debbie doesn't mean it to have Jason's name out there to Michelle, where Michelle could say it to Nick and Nick could say it to Jason, and Debbie could make herself the target. If she doesn't mean it, if that's what she wants to do, then so be it. Let's see what happens. But if she's just like messing around and just floating a name out there, that's a bad name I think to have floating out there coming from Debbie.
It's scary. You can't imagine that Jason would like to hear his name being floated out there, especially by somebody who he's, had all. I don't even know if they have a handshake deal, but they certainly talked about it. But at the same time, she has had conversations with other people saying that a beauty should go. So all of these conversations are out there. Jason is having that conversation of it should be a beauty that goes next, or maybe it should be a brain that goes next. There aren't specific names that are being floated out in those conversations that we've heard yet, where Debbie is calling out Jason, and that is probably that is something that you want to be more sure about if you're just going to call out a name like that.
See, the thing to me that I think is really, really intriguing about this, where if we say, okay, so if Nick and Michelle are officially having some divorce from working together from the Beauty Tribe, and we say, okay, well, then Michelle, after the merge, she goes back to Julia and Ty and starts to reconstitute that Beauty Tribe. Yeah. And Nick, he's going to end up working with Jason and Sydney over and be one of the newly minted members of the Braun Tribe. Where that Ty and Scott marriage is, where that's really now you have these people back together all in one family, and then how does that sort itself out? Are they able to all work together and then go after brains, or is there too much of a fracture there between Nick and Michelle to move forward as some sort of combination of beauty and brawn?
I don't think so. I don't think that there is too much of a fracture for Michelle and Nick to work together. I think the key thing is Nick doesn't know that a fracture exists. Nick thinks that he has Michelle right where he wants her. He thinks that he thinks that he is such a player and that she is such a player that he can make her do and say what he wants her to do and say. Michelle tells us that's not true. Michelle tells us that she's playing the Daenerys Targaryen game, where she is going to bat her eyes and say, I'm just a young girl who knows not of these things, and then she's going to breathe dragonfire at him when the time comes. That is the kind of thing that she's suggesting, that you can say that you want me to do this, bruh, but I'm not your bro. I'm my own bro. So I think that she has shown that to us, but that says to me that she is willing to play ball as long as it's advantageous. So I don't think that it's too much of a factor for them to work together, but I think it puts Nick at a disadvantage in that relationship.
Okay. You want to start jumping into some of these questions, or do you have any other major things you want to talk about?
No, let's do it, man.
Okay, let's take some questions. Really fun episode. Very excited to get into the merge. Love the merge. Merge episode next week.
Great stuff. Great pre-merge, too. It was fantastic.
Christopher Frick wants to know, is the potential Ty/Braun alliance the biggest threat going into the merge? Ty plus Braun. Well, I think that is a bigger alliance than Ty plus Braun.
Ty plus Braun, so that's 4. That takes a number away from Beauty. The Brauns they're a tight-knit group, and would anyone be suspecting that Ty is their 4th number, and as a 4, could they do some damage? I think that's, I don't know if I would say they're the biggest threat going into the merge, but they're certainly, if that group were to come together, that's a tough squad to untangle. I think you gotta be afraid of that squad.
I think Nick's with them too.
And that's a 5-some. That would be difficult to beat. I feel like that would be tough. You would have to have Michelle and Julia with the brains, and in that situation, you could see those two running with the Brauns. Like, I feel like we are possibly positioned for the Brauns and the Beauties to team up. Even though I said that I think that if the brains were to lose a number, they would lose some of the danger that's attached to having such a big number. I still think that you can see how those Brauns and Beauties would align through Ty and Nick really wanting to play with Braun.
Boy, that's very interesting to see if that could flip the other way. If hypothetically we have that Braun tribe plus Ty and Nick back together with 2 members from Beauty, you could potentially see if that Debbie and Michelle bond is really strong enough where maybe Michelle could pull Julia back.
Right.
And Julia could be that free electron. And then 4 plus 2 is 6. That would give a majority to the brains plus half of beauty.
They would have the bigger frontal lobes.
Yeah. So really, this is going to be a very fun merge
I think so.
next week.
I think
Really.
so, and I think it's a very combustible dynamic right now, so could be really great.
Chemistry.
Yeah, chemistry indeed. I hear that's one of Debbie's jobs. Logan Rex says, Aubrey was shown tonight wearing a fire shirt similar to Jeremy's Cambridge fire shirt. Winner's edit?
I mean,
Chekhov's Cambridge fire shirt.
Is it? I mean, this was filmed before Jeremy won. This was filmed before Jeremy was named as a contestant on. I don't know.
It's not a sign of the winner's edit.
Yeah.
Just as the substitute Stephen Fishback, it's my responsibility to say that it is.
Okay. All right. Fake Mike Boogie wants to know, isn't it unfair that they keep doing a basketball challenge when a former NBA player is on the season? They did this back, I believe it was in episode 4 of the original Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty, where it came down to Spencer versus Cliff Robinson. Boy, Nick really did give Scott Pollard a run for his money, though, tonight.
Yeah, Nick was on fire. He was making it rain dance all over the place. Even Scott at the end of it is like, dude, Nick, that was close.
Yeah.
So Nick came out of that looking really good for his tribe, I think. Is it unfair? I don't know. I feel like, this is the type of challenge that Survivor likes to do anyway. It's not that far from the types of carnival games that they do pull off at the ends of a lot of challenges. It just so happens to be, it's a free throw contest when you have a basketball player in the game. Is it unfair? Maybe, but it's good TV. So as you say, Rob, whoever said this game was fair.
Right. I think they do like to show off, and it's good drama whether Scott Pollard wins that challenge or loses it. So, I'm not going to complain about it. Let's take another question from Sam Shapey, who says, if Aubrey wanted Peter out, wouldn't it have been smarter to wait and do it on the revote? If Ty, Scott, and Julia all have voted for Joe, or even Aubrey had said, she could have 3-2-1'd herself out of the game. All right, so let's talk that through. Should she have then gone with the original vote for Julia, and then on the revote, when it only could be Peter or Julia, flipped her vote, a la Vetus?
It's a really smart observation, and I was starting to fear that was the direction we were going in until we saw that Aubrey had written down Julia's name. I was really worried that some sort of 3-2-1 situation was going on. And also when I saw that Peter had written down Julia's name, I thought that maybe when they say the original plan, had they somehow told Peter, we're going to go for Joe, we're going to go for Aubrey, and that's where he's going to go, and were they going to 3-2-1 Peter or somebody out of the game? I think that there's a lot of wisdom to that of maybe you should stick with the vote, stick with the plan, vote for Julia, let it go 3-3, and now that there's only 2 options, that's when you make the selfish move or the self-interested move and you choose to cut Peter there because you do run the risk. There could be some sort of game that's afoot that's going to take you out there, don't you think?
Yeah, I think at the point also where you actually write Julia's name down and then cross it out and then write Peter, I think at that point you might as well go through with the tie process.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's take another question from the Cuddly Caucasian.
Yes, from Will. Will says, would Peter have played this right if he didn't waffle on targeting Joe and just went through with it?
I mean, I think he'd still be in the game.
Yeah.
So I would say yes. I would say yes to that. I mean, and that's assuming that Ty or Scott or Julia didn't have cold feet for some reason about voting out Joe. Maybe there's some sort of bond that, maybe Scott really loves Joe and he's like a real fatherly figure around camp. They felt bad that the blocks fell on his head. But assuming that they were game to do it, it does seem like it was a mistake for Peter to back down.
I think so, and I mean, we haven't really talked about it, but the way that Peter buckled in the face of FBI agent Joe Del Campo, it's the Ghostbusters rule. When someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. In Survivor, if someone asks you, are you voting for me, you say no. And you don't just waffle on that issue and say, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. Peter's whole handling of that situation was really
It was really bad.
It was bad.
It was really bad. Because Joe says, look, I want a straight answer. yes or no. Like, don't dance around the question. Are you trying to vote me off? It's like, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah.
Like, Joe should have just walked away at that point.
Do you have a bug in your ear? Can you not hear what I'm saying? I know there's precedent for that. But it's a simple question with a simple answer, at least on Survivor. And like he's cracking up in his face. It's just, Peter's social game just was not there as he was playing. I think that is as clear of evidence of it as you can possibly get.
Yeah, but Joe does have those really strong instincts where he talks about it. You ask somebody a direct question, and if they dance around it, then they're being evasive, and you know what's going on. But I was really surprised that then he forgave him. He was just like, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah. People make mistakes, Rob.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was the most impressive thing that I've seen from Joe this season so far, though. I mean, you could make the argument that it was too aggressive, the way that he was coming after Peter, but the way that he was able to just get the information exactly that he was seeking, and he was very confident in his answer. I thought that was good stuff. I thought that was the FBI agent that I was hoping to see this season. So I'm glad that he came alive in the pre-merge.
Okay. What about from Amy, who says, did Julia really play any role in saving herself? I mean, I think that she certainly did. I mean, she didn't come into the game as like some shrinking violet, right? She was somebody who like came in, said, okay, this is what I have to do, willing to work with Ty, willing to work with Scott, and I think she didn't go down without a fight.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that you brought up a really good point about how at Tribal Council she continued to pile rocks on top of Peter by saying yeah, he's we were talking about stuff. Yeah, he's throwing blocks at him. We were talking strategy, and he was saying things to me. So she was just helping that case. She was helping to strengthen that situation, and I think that she chose wisely in terms of the people that she ended up voting with. She trusted Ty enough. Ty and Scott are really tight, and she recognized those people as having the same interests as her in terms of moving forward. So I think that Julia played this pretty wisely. Did she play, any sort of rock star game in this episode? I don't think so, but she played a really solid, reasonable, careful game where she was more impressive than I expected her to be coming into this episode.
Peter, I think, also was at a big disadvantage at this tribal council, that he was seated all the way to the right. I mean, he noticed that Jeff called out that, like, boy, people are talking at this tribal council, and he's like, yeah, well, I don't know what they're saying. I can't read lips.
I can't read lips. It looks like piranhas.
Yeah, they're like piranhas right now. What the heck's going on here? He really did not. And again, who knows what actually happened at the tribal council? We weren't there, and there's more than what we see on television. But it didn't seem like he put his foot down and said, hey, let me tell you right now that I am 100% loyal to this Brains tribe, and I've had conversations, but whatever. I'm with this Brains tribe. We're 5 strong.
Yeah. I don't know. Coming into that tribal council, I think he was boned. I don't think that there was much Peter could do, because he would have gone to a tie at worst, and I think that he would have been. I don't think anyone's risking rocks for Dr. Pete.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that we have to give even more credit to the threesome of Ty and Scott and Julia for having to reference Caleb once again, the kahunas to go to that 3-3 tie?
Yeah, it was big kahunas for sure. I think that they would have done it. I think that they would have gone there. I think that at that point, Ty and Scott, they figure, we could move along sort of sheepishly with this group, and we could just vote out Julia, but Julia could also potentially be a pivotal person with us on our side moving forward if we want to have any chance of getting ahead in this game. So their willingness to do that, we don't see that super often on Survivor, the people that are willing to push it that far. I think that it was a really solid gamble that someone, whether it was Aubrey or Joe, would be reasonable enough to flip on a tie. And I think that they correctly guessed that one of those two would have done it. So, yeah, I think it was a really solid play from those guys.
If it was your fishy to hand out, if it was your wiggy to hand out, where would you go with it?
Yeah, I think talking it through from that direction, I think that the triumvirate of Ty and Scott and Julia, I think they played this really well. I think that they played a really solid game tonight.
And if I was going to drill down even further, I think I would give it to Julia, just for the sake that it was her butt on the line. She was the person in the worst position coming into it. I mean, Ty and Scott didn't have a lot of skin in the game. They were sort of like, if Peter stays, he stays. You know, it was, that they never talked about like letting it go to the point where they even talked about the hidden immunity idol. So they were fine either way. They got what they wanted to have happen, but it's not the end of the world if Peter ends up staying in the game and Julia goes home in that spot. This is, definitely the better situation for him. But for Julia, with her back against the wall, I think I'd probably end up giving it to her if push came to shove.
Yeah, and what's especially great for Julia, and what's kind of remarkable for Scott and Ty, is Julia being the person targeted. If it were to come down to rocks, Julia is safe there. So Scott and Ty are potentially putting their necks on the line for Julia in this situation.
Yeah. Okay, let's do some more questions. Okay, how about this one? This is from Titan11.
Titan11. The Brain Tribe originals seem to be in a disadvantage coming into the merge due to their lack of relationship with other castaways. How can they combat this? Yeah, I think that, as you had mentioned before, we could be looking at a really interesting tug of war based on that split between Nick and Michelle. Who hops where? Does Nick really want to work with Braun and get his way, and does that come together, or is Michelle so Team Debbie that she could work some magic and get the Brains in that position? But I do think that the Brains are in an uncomfortable spot right now.
Why do you feel like that they're in an especially uncomfortable spot? Because you feel like that coming out of this vote, you feel like that they're in a compromised position where there's 3 people work against them on the one side, and potentially if they got 4 other people from the other tribe, that they would be outnumbered 7-4.
Yeah, and I think that just their social relationships in the game are not as strong as the bronze options and these beauties who have teamed up with Scott Pollard, and by extension, because we know that Scott is really tight with Jason and Sydney, they may have teamed up with them as well. So I think just in terms of the social dynamics, you feel like the beauty guys, the beauty ladies and Ty and Nick, you feel like those people have more flexibility right now. I feel like especially Ty and Julia, I feel like they are inclined to keep working with someone like Scott Pollard, and I think that would be bad in every conceivable way for the Brains.
Yeah. This is really, really fun, this 3-tribe format, to see how it's going to go. Just say a gentleman's bet, not a knowingest know-it-all or anything like that. Which is the first tribe to be wiped off the board?
Oh, man. First tribe to be wiped off the board?
Yeah. Have no remaining members.
Oh, man.
Out of the risk game.
No. I think I would say, I feel like the Brains, I think I would take the Brains. I think that I would take the Brains because I think that the Beauties and the Braun are going to be tighter with each other, and I think that the Brains are in a bad spot. So that would be my pick.
Yeah, I think that's where I would go as well.
Yeah, I think that's just. It's not necessarily my preference because I want to see Debbie stomp all over everyone. I want those bomb doors to open and everyone to get annihilated, but I don't feel fantastic about their spot in the game right now. And I think that even, really almost no matter how tonight shook out, I would be nervous about where the Brains are right now.
Okay. All right, a couple more questions from Damon, who says, changing decisions at Tribal Council seems to become more popular every season, even though it was once something that no one did. Is this a result of Malcolm's double idol play in Philippines? Well, certainly that's something that we discussed quite a bit in a certain 300-hour audiobook, how players more and more
it now.
More and more change up what they're doing at Tribal Council.
Yeah.
I just think that, the game is a lot more fluid than it used to be. You would say, coming into an episode, I feel like that more and more we don't know necessarily who's going to go home, where I feel like, in the first few seasons of Survivor, often you would tune in. It's like, okay, well, I know this person's going home tonight, and that's kind of how it was. So the game has just, accelerated more and more and more. The hidden immunity idol, that people are much more aware of just how fluid these situations are. So I don't think it's, I don't know if there's one singular moment. I think that there's a lot of people at that Tribal Council. I don't think Scott Pollard ever saw Malcolm play in either of his seasons.
He might have. It was a Jeff Kent season if he wanted to watch those pro athlete seasons.
Yeah, sure, he might have. I don't think Joe Del Campo or Peter, although, again, those are the guys on the wrong side of the numbers tonight. So I think that it's just something that's in the ether on the show, where people are like, making moves at Tribal Council. I'm sure it's something that they're talking about more and more at those Tribal Councils and in the conversations on the beach leading up to those Tribal Councils.
Well, it's that phrase, Tribal Council is alive. I've never seen a Tribal Council so alive. I love it when Tribal Council is alive. Well, when you call a thing alive, you're basically calling it like a living, breathing ingredient second in the game, and I do think that Tribal has become something of a player, or at least an element. The way that immunity idols are used or advantages are used, Tribal Council is now a principle in the game where you can make moves happen in that space, whereas before it really was just a place to do some TV talk before you made the decision that had already been arrived at 30 minutes earlier. And I think that that's still often the case, and probably more often the case than it's not, but it is also now a battleground in a way that it hasn't been before. Truly is an evolution of strategy, Rob.
Yeah, even before voting blocks were invented on the next season.
Uh-huh.
All right. What about from Brooke Howard?
Brooke Howard says, with Purple Nick's sudden airtime tonight, is it safe to assume he will be voted out next week? I don't think it's safe at all to assume that Nick would be voted out next week. I don't think that Nick is in the best position in the game, but I don't think he's in the worst position in the game. What do you think? How are you feeling about Nick after this episode?
I mean, on the one hand, Nick does fit the bill for being a traditional merge boot for next week. First vote after the merge. Okay, who's an alpha male type guy who people might be afraid of going on an immunity run, while he definitely came off looking good this week, and not just on the beach, but also in the challenge. Maybe that's something that opens people's eyes of, okay, he's a threat in the challenges. But just looking at the way that the tribes have broken down, I'm not sure necessarily why he would be the target for any of these tribes. And it really will come down to which of the two tribes are going to work together. And unless Beauty feels like that, it's almost like the way that Aubrey might have felt about Peter, of we just can't trust Nick moving forward, where Julia and Michelle are going to, in a Kylo Ren type move, not Kylo Jason type move, of we will carry out the work of Anna and make sure that he's the first.
I will finish what you started.
Finish what you started, Anna. Anakin Skywalker.
Anakin Skywalker.
Anakin Skywalker. Then, I don't know why he would be the threat. It seems weird that Beauty would come after one of their own in that spot. So what's going to be the pairing, or which two groups will work together to target one of the other groups?
Right, but I mean, if there is a world where these people, where whatever majority is created at the merge is deciding to, go thumbs down on the beauties, like to say, like, we're out on the beauties, I do think that Nick is probably a prime target. If people do decide, like, if the Brawn decides, I want to play with Brains, if they like Debbie, if they like Neil, if they can feel comfortable with Aubrey and Joe coming in, like, if that becomes the situation, you could see them wanting to get rid of Nick because of the reasons you outlined, that Nick is strong in challenges, that Nick has shown a willingness to kind of play the game and be a little bit manipulative. You could see it. I just don't think that it's safe to assume by any stretch. I think that there's a lot of different options out there.
And I feel like there's more groundwork there to see Braun working with Beauty, I think, based on what we've seen in the episode. Based on, I have to feel like there's going to be a little bit of bad blood between Scott and Ty and Joe, and potentially Aubrey, even though she did ultimately vote with them. It seems like that there's a bit of a fracture there. And so you certainly could see how you could pick up the pieces where that Scott pulls back in Jason and Sydney, and then you have Ty, and then potentially Julia, and
right.
You already have the connection there with Jason. Only Michelle is the only person that doesn't quite match up with Braun, but you have Julia and Ty over there. So that's what I think is the most likely thing to happen, just at first glance after watching the episode once and an hour after it finishes. That's where my head is at, but who knows? So much could happen.
Numbers on the board, that seems like the most likely outcome.
Yeah. Okay, let's do one or two more questions. Marco Sarek, has Fishback been exiled to the Wiggle Room because he drew the red buff?
Is that what we're calling severe gastrointestinal distress these days? The red buff?
Yeah, he's going to come back, we'll feed him some pizza, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Once he comes back in.
He'll have a good time there. It's a fun room. He'll have a good time. It'll be a good show.
All right. What's the last question, Josh?
All right, Sally Berger says, what should Michelle do in the merge? Should she stay with the beauties or no? And, this is kind of capping off the thing that you had just said, what we had just been talking about. In that situation you're outlining, where all of those people are kind of flocking together, and Michelle is kind of the one who you're not really sure, she doesn't have that direct connection with these people. What should she do? she should go with the numbers, right? You know, if that's the way the numbers are shaking out, she has to go with those people.
Right, and you have to imagine that her tightest ally in the game is Julia, while we saw Anna, with a close relationship with Michelle. Michelle called her my number, we were a final two deal. We know that Anna had a tight relationship with Julia as well from Anna's exit interviews. I think it's reasonable to assume that Julia and Michelle have a very tight relationship as well, and so I think that she's likely to go where her ally is going. And so unless Michelle could pull Julia to go somewhere, I think those two are sticking together post-merge.
Yeah. Hard to see why they wouldn't want to work together.
All right. Josh, great job once again. Very fun to have you back
Thanks
here.
For having me, man. Fun to be back in the seat. I'm looking forward to giving it back to Fishback and getting back to my room. It's comfy there.
Yes. Disappointed to end a podcast with you without some sort of an insider musical number.
Hard to pull that together on the fly. So you'll have to lean on Steven for that this week.
Okay. All right. So we'll see what Stephen Fishback comes up when he sits in for Josh on the Wiggle Room later on this week. Of course, Exit Interview Thursday is on its way tomorrow. Don't miss my Exit Interview podcast with Dr. Peter. Of course, make sure you read what Josh and Dr. Peter talk about in Josh's interview on Parade.com. You can follow Josh on Twitter. Make sure you get that at Round Howard.
Yep, that's it. That's the one.
That's it. Also, you can go to robinswebsite.com/parade to see all of the articles Josh has written this season. And then, of course, we get into it. Kim Spradlin coming up for me in about 15, 20 minutes. For you guys, that'll be posted late tomorrow. And then we'll get into the voicemails with Jason Somerville. Get those calls in. Go to robinswebsite.com/voicemail or 323-282. RHAP. I know that there will be many, many comments about what's to come here in Survivor Kaoh Rong on robinswebsite.com, and looking forward to reading them all. Josh, anything else?
No, hashtag. We need a hashtag.
Oh, hashtag.
Hashtag, so important.
It has to be Anna Kate Skywalker, right?
I think it does. I think that it's, verbose, but worth it. Worth the characters.
Yeah. All right. So very excited. Josh, great job once again. Thanks so much to Scott St. Pierre behind the scenes pulling your questions. We'll be back with many more podcasts coming up about the week in Survivor here on robhaswebsite.com. Take care, everybody.